security. And there would be significant concern. So I don't think any of the European powers are going to agree to the surrender or the loss of any territory. But as I said, you have a line of truce in between North and South Korea, for example, and that is the last truce line of the Cold War. Without an agreement, and it's possible to envisage some sort of situation which might correspond with that in Ukraine.
Also, let's cover current split in the White House. According to today's article in the Wall Street Journal, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and also retired U.S. General Kit Kellogg are trying to convince Trump to be more tough on Russia. However, on the other hand, we have Steve Witkoff, who is advising Trump to move forward with this quick deal. He's confident that Vladimir Putin will agree to full ceasefire. What is your assessment of the split in the White House and two groups of people who have really different opinions? And is there a chance that they would have one single united approach to this war?
Well, I think there is. I haven't seen any evidence myself, and I'm aware that there may be a difference of opinion. I've done a podcast with Rubio. This was a long time ago, and Rubio's expressed view is pretty clear cut on the importance of supporting and continuing to support Ukraine. And one of the points that Rubio made in discussion with me, and I've heard him make it with other people, is that, Trump does not want to have an Afghan-type disaster occurring at the beginning of his presidency, so that, you look at the impact that had on Biden's reputation as president. It was very, very damaging. So I am of the view that there isn't yet a clear policy line, which is encouraging in a way, because it may mean that Trump's previously expressed view is being modified and changed. I think the other leader who met Trump and probably argued with him very logically and strongly about the danger of making concessions to Russia was when the Finnish Prime Minister Alex Stubb went to the States, and of course had the advantage. He's a very good golfer, playing golf with Trump, and that conversation was widely reported. So, what I find interesting at the moment is that Trump has not moved to make concessions to Putin. Okay, there have been discussions which indicate that he might, but they haven't actually happened. And I'm sure there is this debate going on. And if Putin shows no willingness at all, which is the case at the moment, to accept a ceasefire or to compromise at all on his war objectives for Ukraine, they're completely unmodified, then the likelihood is that, Trump does have to toughen his stance and toughen his position.
Also, he has been threatening sanctions, secondary tariffs against Russia. However, it seems also that he is providing Vladimir Putin with lots of time. He is not setting any kind of a quick deadline for this. What is the reason why Trump is has a so friendly stance with Putin and giving him a lot of time for this decision on a full ceasefire?
Well, in a way, I think I've argued that an early ceasefire is not to Ukraine's advantage. So, but look, Trump has got, he's done an awful lot quickly, and a lot of it's been done spontaneously without it's difficult to detect, where there's a plan, where there's a strategy. And at the moment, there's huge preoccupation, as you're well aware, with the tariff issue and the relationship with China and the modification of that and the chops and the changes, the negotiations. My experience of, which is quite extensive, of dealing with the US government is that one crisis at a time, and you've got an ongoing crisis over tariffs, is about as much as any administration can deal with. I think, in a way, as I've said already, it's to Ukraine's advantage that there isn't a hasty deal, because Russia, in my book, is in a vulnerable situation, and we need to help Ukraine to hold the line. I mean, the cost in this conflict to Russia, I was looking up the statistics in the last month, and Russia's advance militarily has slowed. The losses on the battlefield for them are over 40,000 casualties and deaths, over 5,000 pieces of military equipment, hardware. This is huge, and Ukraine is basically being very successful, not necessarily at holding territory all along the line, but in wearing down the Russian military effort. And the other point which is important to consider is what impact a further mobilization on the Russian side will have politically in Russia. Bear in mind that the people who pressurized the Russian leadership during the war in Afghanistan were Russian mothers, and they are a potent political force in Russia if the cost becomes unacceptably high. And the recruitment now, which has been in the sort of non-Russian parts of Russia, in the rural areas where families have been paid a lot of money to bring in more soldiers, we're reaching the point where he's going to have to recruit in Russian urban areas, and this politically will have a huge impact in Russia, in my view.
You just mentioned about Russia's mobilization. Vladimir Putin has just called up another 160,000 young men as in a conscription campaign. He said that they will not fight in the war against Ukraine. However, if he decides to continue war against Ukraine, if he rejects a ceasefire proposal, do you think that he will be forced to conduct another round of full-scale mobilization?
Well, absolutely, because the battlefield casualties, the fatalities, have been at catastrophic levels. So these military resources, these human resources, have to be replaced. And because of the controversial nature in Russia of mobilization, and particularly in urban areas closer to Moscow, this becomes more and more problematic politically. And of course, a lot of the Russian elite, a lot of these young people who might risk being called up, I mean, large numbers have left the country. They've gone, well, places like Georgia, where it's relatively easy to get into those countries, they have left. And there's no question that this is another stress factor operating on the Russian nation as a whole. And these stresses now are really beginning to bite and to count and to make a difference.
I know it's really difficult to have the full information about Vladimir Putin's inner circle, but do you expect this stress also to rise among Russian generals, security services officials, and Kremlin's officials? Do you feel that the security and military groups around Vladimir Putin are in the support, would like to support ceasefire, or would like to continue the war?
Well, that's a difficult question to answer because, frankly, we don't know. But if we sort of speculate, and it is speculation, there must be people around Putin, particularly amongst the military leadership, who are very, very concerned about the cost of this war and the inability of the Russian military with all of its vast resources